Let's dig deeper into the low-altitude economy concept originating from China. It's not fundamentally different from Europe's air taxi as promoted by Volocopter in Germany or Arker's air taxi in the US and others, but a big difference is the systemic approach in China. Progress in the West is driven by visionary inventors, investors, and innovators using the space the liberal political system gives them while pushing regulations forward, trying to create a media hype, and pushing society towards their vision. Meanwhile, China has already deployed vast amounts of resources, including dedicated research facilities, not just for the self-flying vehicles themselves, but also for regulatory questions, education for future talent, safety regulation, authority job splits, and all the things around the whole economy. That's the big difference in the Chinese approach to innovation. It's never about the individual heroes. To say the West is bottom-up development while China is top-down is, however, deeply unfair to the countless small and mid-sized innovation, engineering, and invention startups in China. A better explanation of what happens in China comes from Sun Tzu's famous Art of War, 上下同欲者胜. He who has the same wish at the top and at the bottom wins. Or in modern language, when government and all parts of society are well aligned, a country is the strongest. In that sense, starting close to the top, but not the very top, such as Prime Minister of the government or the chairman of the CPC, but rather the Ministry of Civil Aviation took it upon itself to launch a 5-year plan in 2021, declaring the low-altitude economy as a space of economic importance, where regulation was needed in order to allow for widespread innovation. As a background, unlike liberal models where any space is free for private usage, in socialist China, the airspace is state-controlled first, with only dedicated corridors available for civil aviation. In that sense, the regulation of the bottom kilometer isn't reducing innovators' freedoms, but rather opening up another space in a densely crowded country. Furthermore, the Ministry of the Central Government only acted because various inputs from society and research into international development indicated that there's both a need and an opportunity. In that sense, the ministry was also responding to pressure from the bottom. The ministry defined the term, declaring itself responsible for regulating it in cooperation with other ministries like the Ministry of Transportation, and put forward not just regulation, but also goals as well as support, for example, for building mini airports and lift-off stations. From there, the perhaps most fascinating part of the Chinese political system kicked in. Seeing the potential for a new emerging industry as well as the central government support for the topic, immediately several regions like Shenzhen, Hefei, Hainan, and Chengdu declared interest in becoming pilot zones, offering massive financial incentives and favorable regulation for experimental test operations. The reasoning for local governments is very simple. If the industry eventually kicks off and one city is already established as an innovation center, automatically more companies will come. They attract more talents, thereby making the city more attractive for future investment. Still, a positive cycle. Often, such cities already have local champions in the industries, like Hefei or Shenzhen in this case. Besides monetary and legal incentives, a common method is to establish think tanks and entire research institutes at such a location. They can then crank out international papers, such as this comparative study on the regulation of the low-altitude economy between Europe and China here. Another important aspect of defining the low-altitude economy and then developing experimental regulations at various levels is the systemic approach about the topic. See, I compared the topic of low-altitude economy to European and American flying taxis, but the Chinese definition in fact, is far more comprehensive. It includes obviously commercial and emergency package delivery for food and online shopping or medical supplies, but also things I would personally never have thought about, like drone shows occupying the same space. Indeed, you would not want a 10,000 coordinated drones show suddenly be interrupted by a misguided pizza delivery, right? Or worse, have an emergency delivery of a donated kidney suddenly get stuck because a drone show lifts off. So you do want to have regulation that coordinates all these activities in the same space. And outside of cities, in rural areas, logistics drones need to avoid crashing with drones or small airplanes observing, for example, crops or irrigation systems. And you wouldn't want a farmer, for example, drone spraying pesticides right next to a hot air balloon festival. Actually, the hot air balloons are really mentioned in the definition of low altitude economy. All these activities are part of the low altitude economy definition, and responsible departments as well as authorization processes are defined in a comprehensive fashion. There's always intersections where things are unclear or several ministries declare responsibility. So it's not like China will be perfect, but at least they're trying to integrate everything into one comprehensive jurisdiction. At the same time, each pilot city heavily promotes their local champions so as to have viable companies headquartered in their jurisdiction. Now compare this to the tragedy in Europe, where one German flying taxi provider, Volocopter, announced to provide services at the Olympic Games in Paris. What an excellent opportunity for global promotion and to show the world how European innovation power is thriving. Yet not only did they fail to get the final approval of authorities in Paris in time, so they couldn't actually do the pilot, they also turned out to lack funding, and frankly, at an absurdly small amount of 100 million euro. I'm just thinking of the billions and billions always ready and available to bail out banks or financing foreign policy goals, let's call it this way. What is 100 million euros? Yet it was too much for all of Germany and the EU to support at least one global champion in a future technology. And what happened then? A Chinese car company, Geely, is quoted as their last hope. They may use some spare cash to buy a staggering 85% stake for just 95 million euro, buying all the IP rights, and you can assume where the final product then would be produced, if ever one is even developed. I will need to do some more research in the topic because the latest article I found was from January 2025, saying the venture was now filing for bankruptcy, but hoping to survive after restructuring and still possibly a cash injection from Geely, the Chinese car company, who already holds a 10% stake. Definitely not a big success story one would have hoped for. And I'm not here to blame China or the Chinese car company who takes this bargain. It just shows the amazing lack of vision and strategic thinking in Europe. While researching on this topic, I further noticed that the EU's Alliance for Zero Emission Aviation, which one would think is in a similar vein of a low altitude economy, somehow appears under or besides the defense industry and space section of the EU. There's a tab of aeronautics industry next to the defense industry, but the YouTube video with the glorious number of 160 views introducing the vision of zero emission aviation is posted to YouTube by a channel called EU Defense and Space. Nobody in the regulatory system of Europe seems to be focused on the commercial potential of the low altitude economy. And I'm not hating on Europe, really not. I hope and wish we in Europe can change, can drop our blinders and learn from China, where China's system simply works better than ours. No, I'm not saying that we should copy everything about the Chinese system or that China is perfect, just to make that very clear as well. But why do we call for an alliance of volunteers for zero emission aviation under the space and defense section, and then are unable to find 100 million euro to finance a civilian startup with a huge market potential? Not to mention zero strategic clarity where regulation will go. Meanwhile, China coordinates regulation, investment, and everything that's needed to really build up a new area of the economy. What do you think?